First of all, my name is Patrick Cook. I'm Executive Director of Public Affairs here at Middlesex Community College. We're pleased to be co-hosting this debate today with the Lowell Sun newspaper. The Lowell Sun asked us in the spring if we would host a series of debates over the coming months between now and the general. And we hosted our first one with the Attorney General candidates back at the end of May, and we're proud to be hosting this as our second one here. And I'm thrilled to see a packed house in the middle of summer like this, especially with it being so warm out today, so thank you all for coming. All right, first off, I'm going to start with Marian Ryan. Before becoming District Attorney in Middlesex County, Marian spent more than 3 decades as one of Middlesex County's top prosecutors, trying and convicting some of the state's most violent felons, fighting for the rights of victims, and creating innovative crime prevention initiatives. A cum laude graduate of Boston College Law School, she has made her mark as a skilled litigator, bringing hundreds of felony cases to trial, including dozens of first-degree murder prosecutions. Marian's own life experience has given her a deep and broad understanding about law enforcement, victimization, and the judicial system. Let's have a round of applause for Marian Ryan. Michael Sullivan is currently in his second term as Clerk of Courts of Middlesex Superior Court. Michael presides over the arraignments and pretrial procedures of all criminal cases that have commenced in the grand jury of Middlesex County. Prior to being elected as Middlesex Superior Clerk, Michael was an Assistant District Attorney in Middlesex County District Court and Assistant Attorney General, as well as serving on the Cambridge City Council, chairing both the Finance and Public Safety Committees. Michael is a graduate of Boston College, receiving his JD degree from Boston College Law School. Round of applause for Michael, please. Okay, now I've got my coin here that Mary Jo is reminding me of here. So the very first order of business I want to do is...
Mary Jo thought she was doing the coin toss.
No, we're going to get to her in a second because I'm going to introduce them as well. I want to just, in terms of the very first question that's going to be asked during the debate, and I'm going to introduce our questions in 1 second. Just to determine who's going to answer first, we're going to go with a heads or tail toss. And Marian, if you could call heads or tails?
Tails.
It's heads. So Michael will be answering the first question. The questions today are going to be asked by our panel. The question is over to my left, to your right. And I'm going to start with one of my colleagues at Middlesex, Mary Jo Griffin. She's the Director of Community Outreach for the college, handles a lot of our public events and a lot of our government work as well. And she's got a love for the media and all things politics, so I know she's been really eager to participate in this one today. Mary Jo, a round of applause. The thorn among the roses in the middle is Chris Scott, who's the enterprise editor at the Lowell Sun newspaper. He's been there now since the mid-1980s, has been covering the political beat, and just about every political race that the state of Massachusetts has had to offer at one time or another. So, Chris, thank you for coming. And finally, from Chelmsford, we have Laurie Myers, a victim rights advocate, who has been involved with so many of these cases over the course of decades, is also very politically savvy and media savvy, so she's wearing all of her hats here with us today. So thank you, Laurie. Okay, before we get started on our first questions, just so you understand how it's going to flow, each of the candidates is going to be given 1 minute to respond to a question from the panel. At which point the other candidate will also be allowed to respond in kind for 1 minute, and there'll be a 30-second rebuttal to be allowed after the initial round is completed. There will be closing statements allowed at the end of the program from each of the candidates. They'll be given 2 minutes to make their closing statements. And we should have a pretty healthy amount of questions coming from the 3 panelists here, so I think we've got enough to cover for the next 45 to 60 minutes. So if we could get started, first up, I think we're going to go with Chris is going to ask the first question, and Michael will have the first answer.
Thank you, everyone, for coming today, and obviously thank you to Michael Sullivan and Marian Ryan. Mike, my question to you is, during a recent Sun interview, you were quoted as saying that you thought the Middlesex District Attorney's Office has lost its gold standard. You said that under previous DAs, it was considered the gold standard of district attorney operations across the state. Can you tell us what prompted you to say that, and can you give us some concrete examples of why you think it is no longer the gold standard since Marian was appointed?
Well, first let me thank the Lowell Sun for all its efforts in getting us here today. I know it took a lot of effort to get us here. And I want to thank the Lowell Sun and MCC for hosting. It's simple. I've sort of watched what the office has done, and I really had the best hopes for Marian in terms of when she got appointed. We've been friends for a long time, and I didn't see the best. I saw an office where people were leaving, were disgruntled, and continued to leave up until this very day. And I knew we could do better. I knew we could do better in terms of the way in which cases get prosecuted, in terms of we had an open file policy, in terms of working with defense counsel, that cases got tried in a timely fashion. All that seemed to disappear in the last year or so. And I think that's a travesty in terms of what's going on. It's a travesty in terms of how this office can work with victims. The big thing for me was a year ago this end of this month, was when the DA herself gets up and the first words out of her mouth were to blame the victim in a travesty to the office. I was at home that day watching television, was amazed what my friend had done. To blame a victim in a domestic violence case was beyond my comprehension. That's not the gold standard of what DA's office is all about. That's not what Middlesex has been all about, and it can do better.
Thank you.
The quality of work that is done by my office has in no way been anything less than the gold standard, I think. And right here in Lowell, over the last few months, that's been very evident. We've been up here a number of times. We've unfortunately had some very serious crimes here. Those crimes have been addressed effectively by my office. We've made arrests in a number of those cases. We've been working closely, and that's something that I bring to this, is that experience and that knowledge. No one knows Lowell better than I do. I've been prosecuting cases up here for 30 years. The police chief and I have been working together for 30 years. We talk all the time about what needs to get done here, as well as in other cities and towns across the country. You know, at the end of the day, the core mission of the district attorney's office is to be out prosecuting cases, investigating cases, making people safe. That is the core mission of the district attorney's office, is to protect the citizens of Middlesex County. Certainly from that experience and from doing that work grow many other things, diversion, prevention, all of those things. But the first order of business is to be doing those cases and doing them well. Just in the last few weeks, some of the incredible verdicts that have been attained by members of my staff right down the street at the Superior Court, people with serious, serious records, terribly violent offenders who've been effectively prosecuted. The indictments that have been sought as we work to address things like the opiate crisis and so many other issues across this county. Middlesex County stands far above any other district attorney's office in terms of the quality of work it produces.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, are you
Rebuttal?
You have 30 seconds on a rebuttal.
I only wish it were so. I only wish it were so. In terms of, I'm not going to take a back seat to anyone in knowing Lowell. This was my first legal job. Terry was my first boss. I was a supervisor of the Lowell region as DA because there was a problem up here. I got sent by the DA and the first assistant to help resolve that issue. I look forward to coming back next January to resolve the issues in the Middlesex DA's office.
Marian, expanding upon the response you just referred to, the flurry of recent crimes here in our own community, and how our leaders have been extremely responsive and stepping up and using words like vow to crack down on it and deal with those responsible swiftly and severely. And you just told us they look to you, the district attorney, for assistance. Can you be a little more specific for we lay people as to what you, as a district attorney, will do to help the citizens of Lowell in the current crime waves?
Of course I will. Thank you, that's a great question. And I'm able to give you a number of examples. One of the things is, as I said, because of the working relationship and experience I have working up here in Lowell, we're able to talk very easily and very effectively. I know the detectives well, I know the chief well, so we are able to talk. We talked all this weekend. We talked last week as a result of the shootings a week ago, Friday, I guess it was, up here. And as with so many things, it's a coordinated approach that we take, and our office offers a number of things with that. One of which is it is not just apprehending individuals, but we are able to do that too. I was up here last week meeting with the state police, with the Lowell police, in terms of deploying resources. And that experience and those contacts allows me to easily reach out to other law enforcement agencies and bring them here. And you saw some of the effect of that this weekend. We were able to have a lot more police officers on the street. We were able to obtain a number of guns in those situations. The officers made arrests. That's one way of dealing with the situation. The second level is in terms of building and prosecuting cases. Our office offers 24/7 to police departments across the county a search warrant team. They're up in Lowell all the time helping. I was here 3 weeks ago when we had a terrible incident up here. The search warrant team responded. They were able to help the police in preparing those search warrants, because it's not just making the arrest, it's thinking long-term. And that's what you learn with perspective and judgment, is not just how do I arrest that person, but how am I going to be able to build a case that will result in a guilty verdict for someone who's done something? How will that case stand up on appeal? What will I be preparing for that? So there's that piece of it. And then the third piece is thinking about larger term. We've got some serious, complicated crime issues here in the city that we need to address. Those are not dealt with just with an immediate arrest. We're going to be working on building out some longer-term investigative tools, as we've done in some other communities. About a month ago, we were able to do a similar thing out in Framingham. We were able to use...
Michael, what is your response to the flurry of criminal activity here in the city of Lowell?
No, as Mayor of Cambridge, I had to deal with crime in the streets firsthand. And it wasn't just about prosecuting the cases. And much Marian said, it's about being reactive. It's about being proactive, is how we make a difference. One of the things I pride myself on is having been a manager, is about the 4C's in life: communication, coordination, cooperation, collaboration. When we work together, we can make a difference. A line I heard from the former district attorney, Jerry Leone, had taught me that once we see a problem, we're better off resolving the problem than we are just allow the problem to exist. Why create another victim? So I think being proactive, working with the community as a whole, not just with the police department, we can make a difference in terms of making our streets safe. I'm the father of 2 teenagers. I get it. There's not a night that goes by when they go out that my stomach doesn't turn, that they're going to come home safe. I want every parent to feel safe about their kids coming home, and this office needs to be proactive, not just reactive.
I would suggest that across this county, and particularly in Lowell, it would be difficult not to see how this office has been proactive. I myself in Lowell have been here a number of times over the last few months doing trainings out at the high school, training police officers. I chair a task force at the hospital to deal with the opiate issues. We have a hospital-based task force that deals with elders. There are lots and lots of pieces, the proactive prevention pieces, but the reality is people need to be safe. When we had 5 people shot last week on the street, we're beyond the prevention program. We are then about how do we deal with this? How do we deal? And the other piece of it is people need to feel safe as well as be safe. That's been a part of working with law enforcement, bringing law enforcement out and doing something.
All right, you have a question for Michael?
Yes. So I just want to say thank you to both of you for running and for putting yourselves out there. I know it's not an easy thing, and it's an important job, so thank you. So Mr. Sullivan alluded to the Remy case, and I had this question on my list a little further down, but I thought we could talk about it now. So we know that Mr. Remy was arrested for assaulting his girlfriend, Jennifer Martell. He was released within hours from Waltham Police Department. He showed up for his arraignment the next day and was released on personal recognizance. Then he returned and murdered her the day after that. So moving forward, how would you handle similar cases if elected as district attorney?
One of the things that I'm happy on the work that the Attorney General and the Speaker have done with regard to response to domestic violence in terms of making it its own crime. So therefore, when someone looks at a record, that they fully get the cycle of violence, but also in terms of the serial nature. When an abuser moves from person to person, it sort of sometimes gets lost. And that's what we saw in Remy. The beauty about what the Speaker has offered is that wouldn't be possible anymore. Another big piece is about education in the Speaker's bill at all levels, both in terms of the community as a whole, but also in terms of assistant DAs, probation officers, and judges, is how to respond and how to look at a case and realize what the cycle of violence means. As someone who trained people in response to domestic violence, both as an assistant DA, as an assistant AG, I get it. I understand it. But if we don't work as a community about resolving the issue and addressing it, we're not going to get anywhere. So I would propose doing that. I'm always struck by a particular case I had in which a young girl, and it was prior to the change in the law which allowed for arrests for a simple A and B. And the young girl, 4 years old, had the dentation of her father's ring in her forehead. The police officer made the arrest on the idea being it was a assault by means of a dangerous weapon. That case sticks in my head every single day of my life in terms of our need to be proactive.
With respect to domestic violence, we are, as in so many areas, taking really a coordinated approach. The domestic violence bill that was referenced, I helped to write much of that bill. I testified twice on aspects of that bill. Those will be important tools for us if we're able to pass those. Things like not allowing a court in satisfaction, allowing someone to settle a domestic violence case without it going forward in court. Calling and allowing, one of the things that will be very important is that bill does not permit approaching or intimidating a witness in a domestic violence case within 500 feet of the courthouse. So we will not have the situation that occurs all too frequently of someone who's been a victim of domestic violence showing up and actually being frightened or intimidated by their abuser right at the courthouse. In addition to that, there will be concerns, there'll be discussion with respect to some of the bail issues, some of those other issues that arise regarding that statute. In terms of training, we've done enormous amounts of training among our staff. We also look to be out reaching people before that becomes an issue. As the only female district attorney in Massachusetts, I take very seriously the mandate to train young girls about relationships, to train young men about relationships. With our partner, Middlesex Partnership for Youth, that operates from our office, we are out every week during school talking to people about that, educating people about that. I've also brought to Middlesex County, I know a program that you know, one of my favorites, the Cut It Out program, which goes into salons and is teaching hair and nail skin professionals how to both recognize signs of domestic violence, how to receive a disclosure, and how to help someone by making services available. Those are things that we don't have to wait for money for. They spread the message, and they make members of the community part of the team in addressing this. This is a community issue. We need to empower the community to address it.
Thank you.
Just quickly, it wouldn't have taken me 4 days or 4 months to realize something went wrong. It took this district attorney longer than that to recognize it.
To Marian this time, right? To Marian.
Yeah, to Mary Jo.
Marian, the legislature recently awarded district attorneys a 15% pay raise. Whether that survives the governor's pen is anyone's guess right now, raising district attorney salaries to $171 from $148,000. Is that something that you lobbied for, and is that something that you support? And as a quick follow-up, what became of your call to raise ADA pays to, I think, $55,000 from about $37,500?
Well, thank you, Chris. And two pieces. One of which is the call for specific figures came from that panel of the Mass Bar Association that released a blue ribbon report talking about the fact that we do not adequately compensate young assistant district attorneys and young public counsel attorneys.
So you're talking ADAs?
That was
Okay.
but the blue ribbon panel called for starting salaries at CPCS, Committee for Public Counsel, and the DA's office, that number. And that is something I know well. I started in the district attorney's office at the princely sum of $14,000, and I scooped ice cream at Brigham's to make ends meet. My husband and I have raised 2 kids on a DA salary. So this is something I have really taken a leadership role on. The 2 good pieces of the budget that we speak to allowing us to increase salaries, never enough, obviously. Look at, the legislature did include about a 3.5–4% increase in our overall budget, much of which I will use to fund salaries. It also did put back into the budget something that we had lost, which was the retention fund. The legislature had created a fund that they gave a certain amount of money to, and the purpose of it was for district attorneys to be able to use it exactly for where we see the greatest struggle. With the DAs that have been with us for several years, are now reaching a point in their life where what we are able to pay them is not sufficient to allow them to buy a house, have a child, get married, any of those things. So that continues to be a problem. As the Lowell Sun, I want to thank the Lowell Sun for its editorial this week, indicated the primary reason that people leave our office is it becomes financially impossible for them to stay. We are fortunate. When we seek to fill our fall class of district attorneys, we have no shortage of applicants. They come to us from the best law schools in the country, often burdened by staggering student debt. We ask.
Just, excuse me, could you address the salary for the district attorneys? Is that something that you lobbied for, and is that worthwhile? Is that a worthwhile expenditure of taxpayer money?
I did not lobby for that. You know, I am, as all of the members of judiciary and others that the legislature included salaries for, we're always grateful to the legislature for including something. It is not, I continue to press forward on the issue of compensation for the for the younger staff, for young district attorneys, and I will continue to use the budget that the legislature gives me to, as much as possible, to address that issue, and I will continue to lobby for the fact that to the extent we entrust people with responsibility, we ask them to be out there prosecuting the worst cases, we need to be compensating them appropriately.
Chris, I'm going to allow Michael the same amount of time to
That's
answer
fine.
both questions on the bylaws.
I'm trying to think of a nice word to respond. At 170, actually, under full disclosure, I was 18,000 when I started, so a couple of years really wasn't a big pay raise.
So you didn't have to scoop ice cream?
I didn't scoop ice cream, but in the same regard, though, it was a travesty in terms of what we got. And at the time, our salaries were coupled with the DAs, so that when the DA got a pay raise, the assistant DAs got a pay raise. And my colleagues and I were out lobbying on behalf of an increase in salaries. At the time, they decoupled the assistants from the DA and gave the DA latitude in terms of giving pay raises. Hasn't gotten us very far. The lowest paid person in the courtroom is the ADA. The lowest paid person in the courtroom is the ADA. So I think it's a travesty in terms of the 171 and not to address the ADA's piece. The Senate President was a little bit perturbed, I think, by the question, because she goes, oh, we gave them a cost of living of 3%. Wow. Wow. I think Jim's in his editorial talked about the $500,000 account, ends up coming $751 per ADA. Wow. The president of the DA's Association doesn't necessarily think the $500,000 is a good account because it's basically just throwing money at someone where you're really not addressing the underlying piece that they don't get paid enough. They don't get paid enough. And the DA needs to be more proactive, both here in Middlesex and elsewhere, to get those salaries up. They are leaving because of the low salary, but they're leaving in this particular DA's office for other reasons as well.
Back.
30 seconds.
The salaries, I think this is something we certainly agree that, and I don't think anyone reading that panel report can disagree with the amount of salary that's out there. I continue to press on that issue. I will continue to move forward. I use the money that we are given by the legislature. And to just give you some sense, our budget, we are about 82 to 85% is our fixed expenses in terms of salary, leasing, those things that we have to pay. That small percentage that's left over is what we pay for everything else and what we manage to then use for any salary increases.
Thank you.
Michael, I've been in education and a mother for several decades. I understand how
Several decades?
Yes.
That's 7.
Believe it or not. Look in this room, you see the youth here. I understand how difficult it can be to effectively communicate with young people, to not give in to their peer pressure and stay on the right side of the law. What are your tactics or words of wisdom that you would offer to a new parent or a young educator as they tackle a life dealing with young people?
You know, I wish I knew all the answers. As I said earlier, as a father of 2 teenage boys, my stomach turns every night when they go out. And I hope for the best and hope they return. I think we need to reinvigorate what we do and reestablish what we do and recognize that sometimes changes are necessary. I recently was at a lobbying effort on behalf of rehabilitation of drug cases. Father got up and spoke, did all the right things, Sunday dinner together, went to all the games together, all family time together, 2 kids addicted. He told everyone in the room, close your eyes. Imagine someone you love. Open your eyes. Imagine that person's just been told they're addicted to narcotics and all the life that follows. We need to do better. I don't know all the answers, but I know how to bring people together to make sure that we get in the right direction. That means also encouraging youth to be part of the resolution.
One of the things that I've brought to Middlesex that addresses a number of the issues that you talk about, and you know, I have 2 kids, I've been a mother for decades, I know how difficult it is. And I know how the issues facing kids change. I go into high schools now and I'm shocked by the issues that kids are facing. Compared to what now seems to be the relatively safe childhood that we had. One of the things I brought to Middlesex County is our Safe Babies, Safe Kids Task Force that really starts literally at birth. It starts in our 8 birthing hospitals. So when someone is in the hospital giving birth to their child, they're receiving information from us with respect to safe sleep, because we respond, our troopers tragically respond any number of times to a situation where a child's been put to sleep in a very unpleasant or a situation where something tragic occurs, you know, they're put to sleep on the couch, they're co-sleeping with an adult, that sort of thing. We begin with that. We talk about to parents, we have worked with DPH and the hospitals to be providing information about shaken baby. Everybody who's been a mother for a long time, or anybody who's been a parent, knows how difficult it can be with a child. We continue that program because what we know is that dealing with children and parents, the training and the information you're providing has to be consistent, it has to be fluid, and it has to address people at different points. A perfect example of the kind of training we do and how it works was a case that occurred last week in Somerville. We go out and we spend a lot of time in schools talking to parents, and this unfortunately is becoming younger and younger children, about their cyber profile, talking to parents about protecting their children. And you may have seen last week, we had that work perfectly. A mother who received that kind of training was monitoring her child's online contacts. She noted there was some inappropriate contact going on with a teacher at the school. She went to the school, she dealt with the school. That came to my office. We involved DCF. There was an arrest made. That was a perfect setting in which training worked, education worked. What we know is that you've got to be addressing it. I've been, for about 6 years now, been meeting quarterly with the colleges and universities across our county. We have 26 college campuses. They don't stop being our children because they go to college. You know, as the mother of a freshman daughter, I worry every minute about the things that are happening on campus. That's something we're addressing. So we know that we're out there, we're responding to those issues.
Thank you.
Just saying, I'm going to allow the other candidate to have the
Sure.
extra time as well. Go ahead, Michael.
Just a 30-second rebuttal.
Okay.
So, again, I don't have all the answers. Today's paper, in an article I read today, that we thought sex texting was something in the high school. Today's article talks about it's in middle schools. As mayor of Cambridge, I was dealing with the opiate issues and had a doctor come in and was amazed at how young these addictions were starting and what they were doing to get the drugs. We need to do better. We just need to do better. We need to be able to reinvigorate things, rethink things, retool things. The old ways just don't work.
So on February 20th, 24, Governor Patrick called for the renewal of the Massachusetts Sentencing Commission, which was originally established in 1994 to promote truth in sentencing by formulating uniform sentencing policies. The legislature has yet to adopt the sentencing guidelines in Massachusetts, but judges often use them to justify what some members of the public would consider to be very lenient sentences. So what types of changes do you think should be made to the sentencing guidelines?
Marian.
Is that right? Thank you. I was at that forum that the governor convened and actually was fortunate enough to be a panelist at that, talking about some of those issues. I think that we need to really be looking at sentencing across the board. What has been effective, what has not been effective. You know, this is not a cookie cutter business. But on the other hand, as you see just in Middlesex County, given the breadth and size of this county, you cannot have and should not have someone who commits the same one offense with the same type of record, same kind of offense, get a vastly different sentence than somebody who commits it in another part of the county. So I support some kind of presumptive sentencing. What we know is that mandatory sentences have not been effective. They often are not effective on either end because they don't allow cases to be resolved. They impose sentences that are inappropriate in some circumstances. So I applaud the idea of going back and really looking at that, spending a great deal of time just looking through those categories of crimes. One of the most important things will be thinking about what we consider to be aggravating and mitigating factors, because that is, I would suggest to your point, when people use a sentencing guideline, it is often not that it could not be appropriate, but that one evaluates, for instance, the sentencing guideline as a grid, and you take a certain offense, you find a spot. And then there are factors such as what kind of injuries there are, what kind of records someone may have, things like that, and that moves you up or down on the grid. Obviously, to some extent, that will always be subjective. There has been a great deal of disagreement about how subjective that should be. I would suggest that's one of the things that we should be looking at when we reevaluate sentences.
I serve on the trial court leadership team. And as part of the leadership team, we were begging for the governor to do something because it sat dormant. And the numbers just didn't add up anymore. So I'm glad that the governor's taken the step. I'm hoping others will likewise walk in the footsteps and realize the difference we need to make. But the guidelines in themselves don't do anything unless we take the time to educate people on how to use them. This past July 1, with the judicial pay raise going into effect, there are estimates that 40 to 70 new judges are going to be coming on the bench, some with little and no criminal experience. We've got an obligation to train them, both in terms of how to respond and how to use the tools. You teach them how to respond to domestic violence. Some of them don't have a clue. All due deference to them. But we need to do better. And the trial court's been pushing for this. I'm glad the governor's moving on it. I'm not in support of a mandatory sentencing for narcotics cases. We lost the war on drugs. It hasn't worked. When it costs $48,000 a year to incarcerate someone, $10,000 a year to treat them, it seems that $10,000 is a better use, and that extra $38,000 could be used for something else.
I would agree that training, Laurie, as you know, is an important piece for all pieces of the judiciary. One of the nice pieces for me since coming to this office has been, given the years I've spent doing those trainings and the relationships I've built, you know, one of the interesting pieces is that even the budget, the money for judges to be trained has been reduced. So we've been able to put together a lot of very effective partnerships with the defense bar, with members of the trial court, holding them after work. Very simple kind of low-cost training, very effective in who we've been able to bring in to educate. Judges have benefited, and certainly our office and the defense bar have benefited as well.
Questions, Michael?
Okay. Michael, your comment earlier that you just made that we've lost the war on drugs, it's a good opportunity to ask this question. As both of you are aware, the number of heroin overdoses, both in Lowell, Massachusetts, and New England, have skyrocketed, and the governor had a summit in Waltham last week. Is it time that traditional law enforcement methods in fighting the war on drugs be abandoned in favor of methods favored in other parts of the world, particularly in the Scandinavian countries, where health, rehabilitation, and interaction on a social level is the pursued method to try to fight that war on drugs?
Yes. There's a need to make sure that we're doing all the other things. As your question says, we lost the war on drugs. As the governor declared, it's an epidemic in terms of what we need to do to make a difference. As mayor of Cambridge, I had to deal with the opiate issue and the number of people that were dying, and dealing with the families and working with them to try to make a difference. We've sat back far too long. The old ways didn't work. It's about making sure that we have other programs. The trial court is the Hope More program, which first came out of Essex. It's an Hawaiian-based program, but we're also measuring as part of the program recidivism, because the idea of just throwing money doesn't work. If you're not measuring to make sure it works, then we got to try something else if it's not. So the answer is yes. It doesn't work. Mandatory minimum sentences in narcotics cases has not worked. I'm forever listening to Chris Herron, who's gone out and talked about addiction and what it's done to him and his family. And one of the things he said one day was that people just walked over me, not realizing I was the Celtics player, the Boston College player, the pro ball player. But when they were walking over me, they were walking over my kids, young kids. And this epidemic has not just affected the user, but it's affecting families, it's affecting neighborhoods, it's affecting communities. And we need to do better.
There's really three parts to the opiate issue. There is the terrible scourge of people who are suffering from opiate addiction. And in fact, as you mentioned, are dying because of that. And to give you some idea of the scope of that in Middlesex County, in 2012 we had 65 opiate deaths across the county. 2013 we had 80. As of today, July 8th, we are well over 90. We are on track to more than double by the end of this year. So this is an incredible loss. Think about the loss of potential and the misery brought to families. That's why I've begun the hospital-based task force here. We've been meeting for a couple of years, and I will say, and I've said often, one thing that's important about Lowell is Lowell cares and Lowell takes care of people in that community. I never have to ask twice to bring people to that table. People come to that meeting. We meet quarterly, everyone's there, everyone brings their best information. We have done a great deal of work in terms of, first of all, just the simple piece, the coordination of making sure everybody knows what resources are there, what programs are there. We have helped in getting the beds up at Tewksbury State opened up again for opiate treatment. We have, and this is one of my proudest accomplishments of being district attorney, we have succeeded without waiting for money, without waiting for anything else, to have a drug court start here in Lowell. That is an enormous change that is going to affect quality of life and treatment in downtown Lowell. We were able to get that court started a couple of weeks ago, working hard in a coordinated approach, working with the judges, long meetings with the judges, with the clerks, with probation officers, bringing everyone to the table. The police department's been supportive up here. That is all a piece. All of that, and then in the immediate response, the use of a response to an opiate overdose, I brought together my 54 cities and towns, police and fire departments, trained them in the use of Narcan, the immediate opiate reversal drug. We are seeing that make a difference. It does not address long-term treatment needs, but people, young people for the most part that we see in these situations, live to fight another day. Just today, the Ashland Police Department that had never used Narcan before came upon a 24-year-old man dying in his car and revived him with Narcan. That is something that makes a difference. But we cannot lose sight of.
Mr. Moderator, can I ask a quick follow-up question?
He has 30 seconds to rebut.
Okay, go ahead, Matt.
I'm glad Marian takes credit for the work of the trial court. Drug courts have been on the forefront of the strategic plan of the trial court since we developed a new mission statement. So I'm glad she takes credit for it. It started in Essex County, not Middlesex, with Judge Jack Liu, actually a mass defender, CPCS here in Lowell. It's something the trial court takes very, very serious, a way in which we need to do things differently. In addition, it's looking at pretrial probation conditions now in terms of how we can impact things earlier on. Those are trial court activities, and I'm proud to be part of the leadership of the trial court that's doing those things.
Chris, you have a follow-up question?
No,
You're okay?
Mary Jo, take it.
Mary Jo, from Marian.
I had a different question, but I'd like to follow up on, you know, I understand everything you're saying about what's happening. Then what is your opinion as to why it feels, I've been in the city for 52 years now. Why does it feel worse than ever? What's going on?
In terms of opiates?
Of drug use and crime. We had where that shooting was on a street that we've all been on. Midland Street is just unheard of. So what is your answer to why it feels worse than ever?
Well, I think one of the things is, and it's a perfect segue because it allows me to talk about the other piece of it, you know, while I'm very committed to the treatment piece, to the prevention piece, to doing all of that, but we can't neglect the fact that, you know, the reality right now is a bag of heroin is $5. It has never been cheaper. It has never been more available. So we have people who are making their living, and a very nice living it is, transporting that poison into our community. We, you know, one of the things that has transformed, for instance, gang activity is gangs have become businessmen. There's a lot of money to be made. And those are people that we also have to have an enforcement effort focused on. We have to be using all of the tools of law enforcement to focus on that, to be doing the kind of investigations that allow us to both seize that product, get it off the street, and to be dealing with the individuals who are doing that. That's one of the things that happened in the case we were able to just do in Framingham. We made an arrest of 9 people who were moving a substantial amount of product, who were very well funded, and one of whom was working by day as a drug counselor. So, you know, the reality is it has become a business. We need to be using enforcement efforts towards that business piece. When people can buy heroin cheaper than they can buy a package of cigarettes or a 6-pack, where are they going? The other piece of that, which I've worked a great deal on, is in terms of, you know, I think if everyone were to think about when you were, for some, the older people, when you were younger, how many people did you know who had already been on lots of prescription opiates? We know that one of the ways this is all starting is through the use of prescription drugs as well. Right now, probably every one of us knows young people who've had surgery, who've had accidents, who've had whatever, that have resulted in opiate painkillers being prescribed. I would venture to guess that almost all of you in your medicine cabinet somewhere have a few old opiates. So we've addressed those pieces of it. We are working on the physician management program, making doctors have to be more accountable for what they're writing. In this state right now, the number...
Michael?
Let me start where Marian left off. As Mayor Cambridge was dealing with Dr. Hacker from the Cambridge Health Alliance, there's always an assumption that drugs were coming from someplace else. They were coming from people's medicine cabinets. My educational liaison went home that night and found a box of OxyContin, a pill bottle of OxyContin. That's where the drugs were coming from. Read the articles today with regard to parents telling doctors, don't give my kid those drugs. They can do an extra strength Tylenol. The narcotics officer who took his kid in for surgery, saying to the doctor, he's having his wisdom teeth out. He doesn't need OxyContin. So I agree with Marian in terms of we need to be much more proactive and hold our doctors accountable with regard to that. But in terms of how the streets feel unsafe, it's about working together. It's about the DA's office being proactive. Under Scott Harshbarger, it was about priority prosecutions, moving cases quickly and swiftly through our system so that accountability took place. That's how we can make a difference. It is about the partnerships. It's about, as I said earlier, it's the 4 C's in life: communication, coordination, cooperation, collaboration. This isn't going to be resolved between the DA's office and the police departments. If we don't get buy-in from everyone in the community, we're not going to have an impact. It's about victims advocates coming in and counselors coming in and working together. That's how we impact a community.
Do you want to rebut?
30 seconds on rebuttal.
Just in terms of the other pieces of the prevention pieces and doing things, you know, it's true that one of the things I like to do is in prosecuting these large drug cases, we are very often able to effectively seize assets, to seize money particularly from people who made it through selling drugs. And I like to be able to put that to work as prevention and that involving everyone in that. And one of the ways we've been able to do that is, in very apropos to this, is particularly providing the boxes. I've been able to provide our police departments with the containers that are in the police station. Those big boxes look like a mailbox. You can go in 24/7, dispose of your drugs. I also use some of that money to help our high schools that were running the substance-free programs after graduation or prom, so that we know we have kids seeing that there's an alternative.
That's time. Laurie, questions for Michael?
So in 2012, the legislature passed a law that provided reductions in many of the mandatory minimum sentences for people convicted of drug-related crimes. Some of the same individuals were also convicted of non-drug-related offenses, including illegal possession of firearms, burglary, assault, and some even have violent histories. So how do we strike the balance between assisting people with drug addiction and public safety?
By separating out the two. One of the priority prosecutions would be firearms cases. Those aren't negotiable. Those are not negotiable. Never have been, never will be. It wasn't under Scott Harshbarger, it wasn't under Tom Riley, it wasn't under Martha Coakley, and it was not under Jerry Leone. And I'm assuming Marian, with her training, likewise would make the non-negotiable. It wouldn't be negotiable for me. So we have to deal with addiction separately. But if you commit a violent crime, you do the time. Pure and simple.
I think that you raise a good point, which is that when people talk about mandatory minimums, they tend to really be talking about the idea that there are mandatory minimums for drug cases. Because I think people feel very differently when you talk about a mandatory minimum for someone who has sexually assaulted a child for the second or third time, or somebody who's driving under the influence for the 8th time. People don't have that same reaction. But one thing that's important to keep in mind is we have no mandatory minimum sentence in a drug case, conviction in Massachusetts that doesn't speak to someone who has committed previous offenses, somebody who's doing it in a place where children can be, somebody who's either trafficking or intending to sell, or somebody who's had prior convictions. So there is no mandatory minimum for being addicted to a substance. It is when you're doing those other things, when you're selling, when you have guns, when you're in a schoolyard. Those are the things for which there are mandatory minimums. And you're right, that goes to the idea of presumptive sentencing for some of these offenses. Let's start at a certain place and add aggravating and mitigating factors.
To Marian, correct?
Mike,
think-
you want to rebuttal?
Just quickly, the narcotics piece we can continue to work on, but pure and simple, you do the crime, you do the time. Violent crime is not acceptable anywhere. It's not acceptable here in Middlesex County. We have an obligation to be the voice for victims, and we need to speak loud and clear.
All set?
Chris, your questions for
Sure
Marian?
thing. This issue has picked up a little traction in this campaign. The Middlesex District Attorney's Office is one of the largest in the state, employing, what, a couple hundred lawyers, I think, maybe you mentioned with us. Should the chief executive be a prosecutor and, try cases, or should the chief executive be an administrator and delegate those prosecutorial duties?
Christy, you're referring to obviously the fact that I have a couple of cases that I'm still prosecuting. And, that speaks to the fact.
And again, just let me interrupt, you said to us in an editorial board meeting that you enjoy doing that you consider that part of your job description.
I absolutely love trying cases. And it speaks to the fact of my commitment to families, to victims. The cases that when I was appointed, unlike people who would typically have to leave the office to run for office, that I was in the office, and the governor saw the wisdom of somebody from in the office being appointed to run that office, but it meant that I still had cases that I had spent years. Some of the most serious cases that I was prosecuting, I've been invested with those families in those cases since the night they happened, and we were now 2 and 3 years down the road. I consulted with those families. I looked at the scheduling of those cases. And yes, I have kept a couple of those cases. It is my intention to see those cases to the end. I have not taken on any additional cases. I think that there are different considerations in taking on cases when you are the district attorney. But certainly the families that I had been embedded with since the night for instance, one of them, the death of a police officer, I'd been with that family since the night it occurred. No one knows that case better factually. Nobody has spent more time with that family. I would never, consistent with how I've tried cases over 30 years, I would never suddenly leave a family without taking that case to the end. I'm working down that inventory of cases. It gives me, but having done that and the years of doing that and prosecuting cases at the most serious level, what it does do is it allows me to lead from the front. It's consistent with what we saw today in the appointment of the head of the Boston Fire Department. Mm-hmm. I'm not asking anyone to do something in a case, to make decisions, to know that I haven't done. And that's an important piece. That's an important piece of experience, particularly when you get to the most serious cases, that you have to be leading from the front.
5 previous DAs. Of the 5, only 1 ever tried a case while he was DA. And he tried 1 case. 250, nearly 250 employees, a $15 million budget, 38,000 cases a year. It requires someone to pay attention to the details. Something gets lost when one's either on trial totally, because you have to be total mindset for that, and running the office. So no, I wouldn't try cases as the DA. But I think, Chris, you set up a strange piece there, because with me, not only do you get the prosecutor, you get the manager. Because see, I spent time as an assistant district attorney in Middlesex County. right here in Lowell, as the regional supervisor. I spent time as an assistant AG, prosecuting both criminal and consumer protection cases. In private practice, as a city councilor, of mayor of a major city, as clerk of Superior Court, appointed a special magistrate on the trial court leadership team. It's not one or the other. For me, you get both. You get the lot. Despite the article that was in the op-ed piece in the Lowell Sun, where the columnist didn't have all the facts. If you follow his article, I'm the logical choice for this job. I bring both management and prosecutorial skills to bear.
Mary?
Thank you. Just to kind of give people an idea of what happens when a new assistant comes. A new assistant comes to the office, they go to the district court, they're handling they found to be misdemeanors, they're handling cases for which the only punishment is incarceration in the House of Correction. So they are certainly at the range of things, the less serious range of cases. They would spend 3, 4, or 5 years doing that before they would ever have the opportunity to do a Superior Court case. They would then spend several more years doing those cases before they would ever even be allowed to second seat a homicide or to continue on with the more serious cases. That is a range of experience that our most senior prosecutors have. In order to lead, you need to have had that experience. You need to have been doing that. And it's important to remember that a decision that is retained to the district attorney herself or himself is the determination to make an arrest to proceed in a homicide case. It is incomprehensible to me that it's a decision that's difficult in any event. It would be incomprehensible to make that decision without that experience.
Chris, I'm going to allow Michael a 30-second rebuttal
Yeah.
as well. Marian.
My obligation as DA is to hire good people and not lose good people. My obligation as DA is to listen to good people that put the case together. And I understand the mechanisms putting it together. But the very people that Marian just talked about, a number of them, those more senior people, those more capable people, are the ones that are leaving under her watch.
So just a quick follow-up. Michael, if you're elected, you would not try cases.
No,
And Marian, if you retain the seat, you will not try cases, or there'll be select cases?
At this point, my intention is to finish out the cases that I have kept and not take on additional
Okay,
cases.
thank you both.
Mary Jo, questions for Michael?
It's to Michael.
Yep.
So let's flip it a little bit here. With recent headlines of wrongfully convicted people being released from jail, you allude to the high number, I mean, it's a fact, the high number of cases that the Middlesex District Attorney covers. What safeguards would you put into place, or are there safeguards in place to prevent such injustices in the future?
it's integrity at every level. It's integrity at every level. And integrity in the district attorney. In terms of how cases go through the system, in terms of how prosecutors are trained, in terms of both at the district court level, how they do cases, how they present them to the grand jury, where someone would not give the grand jury misleading information for the purpose of getting an indictment, where a Superior Court judge has to reverse the case, a portion of the case, because the case was overstated by the now DA. When she was an ADA just recently in the Superior Court. It's about integrity. And it's about establishing a unit that would make sure follow through on cases in terms of that we double check. We just don't simply go through the motions, but we double check to make sure we're right. The reason we have appellate levels are because we do make mistakes, but I would work real hard to retain good people so that we decrease our potential for mistakes.
We strive always, obviously, to be doing the best possible job in the case. But one of the things I think is important, and it was one of the first actions that I was taking even as I became district attorney, is if you are doing this work and you believe yourself to be doing it well, you have to be willing to look at yourself. You know, many of the cases you talk about, somebody has brought that case to the DA's office and said something's happened. I don't think that's the way to do that. I was able to join our office in a partnership with the Innocence Project, with CPCS, with the clerk's office. In fact, we invited them to come, with the crime lab, and we were able to be the recipients of a $100,000 grant federal grant for a conviction integrity program. I have always wanted to have one of those in the office. I think that when you do your work well, you should be able to show it to people. You should be open to examination. We have done that. We have our office as well as the clerk's office and the other partners in that grant. We're able to make some hires to do that. It will allow us, when a defendant, and remember, the cases that are going to come through this are cases, primarily homicide cases, sometimes an extraordinarily serious sexual assault case where a defendant would be serving a lengthy sentence. And he makes a showing that it's not a technicality. It is, I did not do this crime. And it's primarily going to be dependent then on forensic testing. This would expedite that process. We are in the process of helping our 54 cities and town police departments look at what evidence has been retained. Is there in certain cases going to be evidence that is able to be retested? If the defendant has made that showing and the testing has been done, we follow that where that goes. It is in part a piece of integrity, but it is also a law enforcement piece. And that's what one of the ways that I've been able to get our law enforcement partners to be so enthusiastic about this is because remember, in these important cases, if somebody has been wrongfully convicted, the crime happened, the criminal is still at large.
Michael, do you want to rebut?
No, I just want to say under Gerald Leone and with Marian's assistant, we are working together. And that program is moving forward both into Suffolk County as well, that has an integrity unit as part of their office and making sure and double checking cases. David Meyer, who had been first assistant lead prosecutor, worked on one of the most famous cases in Massachusetts. Don't be afraid to admit we make a mistake and move forward. But we should minimize the mistakes that we make.
So in 2008, the legislature passed the Massachusetts version of Jessica's Law, mandatory minimum sentences for people convicted of sex crimes or repeat sex crimes against children. Yet time and time again, we hear these cases where offenders are re-victimizing young children. So what's the solution? And can I add, I sit through a lot of civil commitment hearings, and we hear the best experts get up there and say that pedophiles cannot be rehabilitated, that offenders have to be managed. So keeping that in mind.
Questions from Marian first.
Is it? I think I just did the,
Oh,
sorry.
did you? Oh.
I did,
Yeah,
I did the rebuttal.
No,
So.
This is mine? Okay. I spent a number of years prosecuting these kinds of cases. I've prosecuted these cases. I've stood in the hallway of a courtroom taking a child's hand, children as young as 4 and 5 years old, to lead them into the courtroom to testify. As a parent and as the district attorney, these cases are horrifying. You know, there are, what we frequently find are cases that either sometimes somebody serves a very long sentence and goes out to reoffend. We need to be doing better about that. You know, the Supreme Judicial Court, in striking down the lifetime parole, they took away an important tool for us. We've been working with the legislature and trying to address those issues. There clearly are individuals who manifest the fact that they are going to continue to be a danger to children. We have to have something in our toolbox. For the interim, what we will be doing is, in those cases where we charge someone and the person is convicted of an offense against a child, we will seek to have a substantial committed sentence, if that's appropriate, on one charge with a very long probationary period on the other, imposing lots of conditions. You know, for instance, the mental health treatment, staying away from children, all of those. That is what we will have to be doing in the meantime, unless and until the legislature deals with the loss of lifetime community parole.
First and foremost, the legislature has to act. We need only look at what took place in Arlington just a few weeks ago. In terms of travesties, when these things don't work, these are one of the nightmares that DAs have to live with. In terms of you do your best, you hire and retain good people to go out in both in terms of prosecute the initial case, but also work in the civil commitments. And we can't afford these cases to get lost. We just cannot afford these cases to get lost, both in terms of the result, but also in terms of the process. Because the Arlington case was not a DA's issue, it was an issue on the part of the state. And we need a state that's going to be proactive in terms of how it works in these cases. So the legislature needs to act. And it can't wait any longer. One more is one more too many.
And you want to rebut? Okay, at this point, I'm just going to interject. Jim Campanini, from the editor of the Lowell Sun, who's here in attendance with us, had made a recommendation before we began to just add something into the mix here that we're going to allow each of the candidates to ask one question of the other candidates. There will be a 2-minute allowance time for an answer, and there will be no rebuttal time back on this. So, Michael, you can go first if you have a question for Marian.
That's a good one. You know, and this has been a good campaign, and I'm proud to say that we've been friends. I said to Marian when this started, that we've been friends before, we've been friends after, we've been friends during this campaign. And all campaigns are toughly fought. Marian, I guess I want to know in particular with regard to your 34 years as an ADA. Where does the management piece come from when I understand that as you out in the stump say you've held every single job? To my knowledge, you've not held the first assistant's job, you've not held the second assistant, you've not been in charge of a trial team leadership team, you've not been the head of the appeals bureau, you've not been the head of the special unit. In fact, if anything, it seems to me that when you became special counsel, that they kept decreasing the number of people you would supervise. How as DA are you going to do better to work and supervise people and not lose people?
Well, having started in this office as an intern, I had the opportunity, first of all, to serve in a district court, as DAs do. I then was put in charge of a district court. I supervised a district court staff consisting of district attorneys, of support staff, of victim witness advocates. I then became a regional supervisor. At that point, I was supervising 4 district courts with all of their staffs of those levels of professionals, both assistant district attorneys, victim witness advocates, and support staff. I then graduated to the Superior Court, joined a trial team, and served on that trial team for a period of time, and then became a trial team captain, responsible again for the assistant district attorneys, the Superior Court district attorneys serving below me, responsible for managing both. And at that point, we managed both the trial sessions and the cases themselves. At some point, trial team captains also had some management responsibilities for the district courts. I served there for a number of years. I then served as head of the child abuse unit for a period of time, head of the domestic violence unit. I spent 18 years as the chief of the elder and disabled unit. And in each of those units, again, serving a variety of professionals, lawyers, advocates, and support staff. And then I served as, for the 7 years, 6.5 years, as general counsel of the office, responsible both for internal, in part of the internal management team, and also responsible for our outreach and prevention and external efforts. So that, and I bring to the job at this point the 1.5 years, 15 months of managing this office. So I think I have extensive management experience, and remember, at the end of the day, management is important, but the reality, the core mission of this job is protection. It is about public safety. At the end of the day, it is having those relationships. It's being out dealing with what happens and growing the prevention programs from that.
Marian, do you have a question for Michael?
I do. And it relates to the flip side of that, I guess, which is how, and it is a question that puzzles me, which is never having prosecuted a homicide, never having conducted a homicide investigation, never having been in the police station at 3 o'clock in the morning in real time, having to make the decisions not only to arrest, but how will that conviction, once it's obtained, stand up on appeal. I'm curious about how you would plan to make those decisions, and also gain the respect of those individuals who, as I described, have worked their way through that process of doing that, and yet now would be in a position of having to have their choices or their opinions on a case reviewed by someone with far, far less experience than they have, or that anyone in our Superior Court has.
2 minutes.
Thank you. Actually, I continue to respect each and every day for the job I do. I don't have people jumping ship from my office. Solid people. And one thing I guess, Marian, you didn't realize, I actually was out on call as an ADA. Not in murder scenes, but people that were this close. And I was responsible for being in Melrose PD at Christmas time, spending my Christmas day at Melrose PD for a gentleman, and that's a loose term, that kickboxed his wife to inches of her death. That when the police officers responded, they heard a gurgling sound. They thought the water was on upstairs, but there was no bathroom. It was her body. So Marian, I've responded to those calls. I've worked through the night. Maybe that's something you didn't realize, that I was an on-call ADA as well
In Middlesex County?
in Middlesex County.
In the district court?
I guess you weren't supposed to respond, do I get to talk or not?
No, I'm just curious.
Yeah, actually, I'll tell you the case. This gentleman kickboxed, I think at the time, I had to call it in. Dave Ott was the trooper that came out to the case, was responding. I worked with Melrose PD, spent my Christmas Day there, and worked in terms of both the search warrant and making decisions as to how the individual's gonna be treated, how clothes were gonna be gathered, how we were gonna gather evidence. That's what I did. But more so as Mayor of Cambridge, I responded to crime scenes in terms of seeing the after effects, both before and after. I've been in the community before the yellow tape goes up, realizing the need for the proactive DA, what they could do for a difference. I've been there after the yellow tape was forgotten to be taken down, when school children were going to school the next day having to walk through a crime scene because investigators forgot to take it down and got those angry phone calls from families as it related to their kids going to school. I dealt with the fear of crime after the fact. So I'm trying to do that every day.
Okay, at this point, we're gonna do one more coin toss, because we're gonna wrap things up here in terms of the closing statements from each of the candidates. You could just call it again in the air. Marian, all heads or tails?
Heads.
And it's tails.
Need a new call.
So Michael, you've got 2 minutes on your closing.
Well, thank you. First, I want to thank, again, I want to thank the Lowell Sun for all its efforts to get us here. MCC for hosting our great group of questioners in terms of their efforts here today. It frankly shouldn't have taken so long for us to get here. So this is the fourth debate, fourth forum that's been offered to us. And I'm hoping, Marian, that we'll do at least a few others between now and September 9th. Because if you're gonna make your case as an elected official, you need to make it to the people of this county as to why you should continue to be DA. And if you can't make that case to the people of Middlesex County, then you sure as heck can't make it in a courtroom each and every day. As I said earlier, this is, in my mind, a relatively easy decision to make. I refer back to that Lowell Sun piece, where the columnist just didn't have all the facts. This is about both prosecutorial skills and being a manager. It's about making a difference in our communities. As I said earlier, I've been an ADA in Middlesex County, an assistant AG, private practitioner. I've been a city councilor, a mayor, and clerk of Superior Court. I am in the true tradition of this office. Scott Harshbarger was not a prosecutor. He was a master offender. Went to ethics, went to the AG's office, came and did a heck of a job. That was gold standard. Tom Riley had been in private practice. He served as assistant DA, served in the AG's office. Became first assistant Middlesex DA, ran for DA. Martha Coakley was a private practitioner that came to the DA's office, went to the U.S. Attorney's office, came back, ran for office before running for DA. Jerry Leone was an assistant DA, I believe in Suffolk, then Middlesex. Then went to the U.S. Attorney's office. Each of them brought skills back to the office. Some may think that the job qualifications are that spent 34 years in the office, that should be enough. I say the benefit for me in this office that I've not spent 34 years in the office. I come with skill sets that frankly, my friend and colleague just doesn't have.
Thank you. I want to thank the Lowell Sun. I want to thank Middlesex Community College, the panelists. Frankly, I don't know how we could spend much more time together. I've had dinner with my colleague here more than my family in the last few months, so I'm not sure how we could be together more often. But what is important here is that this choice for district attorney is a job in which experience matters. And the skills that I bring to this job are perhaps best summed up by something that happened right here in Lowell. In 1985, I was assigned to the prosecution of the investigation of the murder of a young mother who was found just a very short distance from here, murdered, brutally murdered, in her own living room, and left to be found by her 3 children. when they came home from school. They were 4, 7, and 11. I worked on that case for 21 years, meeting continuously with the investigators, looking at that evidence, thinking of ways we can move that case forward. And ultimately, 21 years later, we were able to bring those now adults together, those young children who found their mother, and tell them we were about to make an arrest. I tried that case. The defendant was convicted of first-degree murder. I went on to defend that conviction at the Supreme Judicial Court. And we brought some measure of closure to those children. This work has been my life's work. This protection of citizens, this knowing how to do this work, to commit to victims, to partner, as we did in this case, victims for 21 years, meeting them at the hospital the night that this happened, staying with them throughout their life, growing and learning from that more about the issues of domestic violence. It also gave birth to my interest in the workplace safety program, because that individual that we convicted had been a co-worker of that young woman. There were things that had happened in the workplace that had been missed. So based on the fact that experience does matter and what I bring to this task, I'm asking for your vote in the September primary. Thank you.